Hello everyone. Welcome to the continuation of Chapter 4 on Jacob's Ladder. This is Part 3, which will be discussing the second pyramid, the process observer, Isis, and Albedo. I suppose that the same will happen to me, namely that I will suffer great difficulty, grief and weariness at first, but in the end shall come to glimpse pleasantries and easier things. Alchemist Michael Meyer. Work on the first pyramid started when someone saw they had problems and wanted solutions. One wants to be healthier, have more money, be more attractive, or have an easier experience of life. Upon reaching that umpire apex, a human running in good optimal fashion will correct many of these problems. People, especially those at the umpire stage, find even more ways to distract themselves from the gaping emptiness of reality, often by digging into a glorified spiritual ego or by acquiring more worldly objects. However, a constant low-grade inner anxiety that one cannot really place continues no matter how many external goodies arrive. The big issues, death, meaning, and reality, are not answered. Rose commented that most at this point go to a therapist who will try and help them to ignore the subliminal messaging coming through, reminding the patient that he can do anything he sets his mind to, and that society will no longer like them if they become inactive in the social commercial game. The person wants to stop at the umpire and bask in the new freedom this rational knowledge seems to give, which will guarantee them a good career, good health, and a good marriage. But then the person gets sick, or the relationship stops going well, or society begins to ignore us, that we begin to wonder what went wrong. A few people become obsessed, possessed, defeated, and destroyed enough to go looking beyond. Richard Rose. First off, we should not look at this as a step-by-step process, such as the first pyramid work needs to be completed before starting the second pyramid work. There can be overlap. There is a point where one moves fully to the next stage, but often multiple stages take place at the same time. Those who move into the second pyramid are no longer interested in feeling better. They want to know the internal cause of their dissatisfaction. Instead of focusing attention outward on the objects and experiences of the dream, we must turn our attention within to try to see who is having the experience and why. Go to the woman who washes her sheets and do the same as she does. Atalanta Fugians. The second phase in alchemy is known by the name Albedo, sometimes also called solutio, and leads to the awakening of the greater mind. This is revealed in the Mutus Liber, plates 8 to 13, and the quote, "Burn your books and whiten your Latin." This is meant that the answer will not be found in books, but within the seeker's own mind. Latin is a word play on two words, the first being Latin, the language, thus burn all of the works of the modern, at the time, enslaving Western world. It also references Latona, the woman of revelation, Isis. To know Isis, one must become one with her, or experience her directly. Albedo begins at the darkest part of Negredo, when we think we have reached the limit. As long as we do not give up at that point, a whitening occurs. It is here that the feminine principle, Luna, Isis, comes into its own. Dreams are exceedingly relevant at this juncture, signifying that the information we need at this stage is more intuitive. A woman is depicted washing sheets. This is humbling and grounding work that we might rather not do. Yet these routines that strip us of, but get rid of our routines that strip us of our defenses and forces us to look at all we have suppressed, just as the dirt from the clothes is stripped away in the washing. Through the humbling work, we are washing out our mind. Through this pain, the white rose is shown blossoming. This symbolizes a pure spiritual substance and becomes the White Queen, Isis. In the myth, Isis searches for the scattered parts of her dead husband Osiris, requiring a commitment to the intuitive feminine side, which comes out strongly in stage 2 of the work. She finds all of the pieces but one, builds a temple on each site, and then reassembles the parts long enough to impregnate herself via a virgin conception to produce Horus. The concept of lost or misplaced parts and the need to regather them was something I recognized as a metaphor for the inner process. Parts we must place together in jigsaw puzzle fashion, as we find one misplaced part at a time rather than all at once. I later found that this idea of finding lost pieces of oneself is the cornerstone of another modern California teacher's presentation. I have lived on the tip of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking on the door. It opens. I have been knocking from the inside. Rummy. That teacher is Jed Strauss. He describes second pyramid process as the rot, letting us know that it's not going to be simple and fun. It is difficult because our entire spiritual search in the first pyramid has been about trying to get somewhere else, or be a better me, as we look to perfect how we feel about ourselves. The rot is the willingness to face all we have run from our entire lives, because there are no more options of escape. We must accept our reality as it is, probably faced with disappointment. Once we surrender to the confusion and start to honestly examine our mind, all that is false begins to rot. Don't push away the rot. Allow it to happen. Then utilize what comes from it as compost to fertilize your inner garden. For as the false rots, what is located are the misplaced parts of ourselves that we covered over with egoic sludge. The rot shows that much of what we thought we were, we aren't, and that many things we forgot or never noticed are actually what we are. In the middle, our worst fears surface. One needs trust. Fighting against ourselves is nothing but exhausting. It makes us prematurely sick, tired, and maybe even dead. The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life, memories, attachments, etc. They burn them all away, but they are not punishing you. They are freeing your soul. If you are frightened of dying and you are holding on, you will see devils tearing your life away. If you have made peace, then those devils will be angels, freeing you from the earth. Meister Eckhart. The awakening process will not make you better. Rather, it dismantles you like Osiris. Or more commonly stated, you realize just how dismantled you are and have been most of your life. You find yourself in pieces. This is a good thing, because we must first realize that we are disassembled before we can begin the work of reassembling ourselves into our natural form. In our childhood, we became fragmented, like a giant jigsaw puzzle shattered into a million pieces. We tried psychology, self-help, religion, spiritual practice, first pyramid work. But all of our efforts couldn't fit those pieces together completely. Only by relaxing into our pain do we begin to see this fragmented jigsaw puzzle of me. We can then look at the pieces honestly and do the real work to remodel our being to match the original, not what our ego has continually forced us to be. Thus we are calling on the force of death in the Osirian dismantle. Not an actual death as in the third pyramid necessarily, but one that forces us to tear all that we know about ourselves, all that we felt was solid and secure, about the world and ourselves. For the awakening process reveals everything was not as solid and stable as we had previously believed. One of the traps in this stage comes from the keyword self-observation, now packaged with two modern spiritual sounding ideals, being in the now and mindfulness. Second pyramid spiritual work has nothing to do with improving oneself. The idea of the need for continuous self-improvement is a way of staying stuck in the first pyramid. What rots, of course, is the same egoistic mind that keeps telling us we have to keep improving. Real self-inquiry sees all parts of ourselves and tracks back to the foundation of each part to see how it originated and acted. It is designed to exhaust the mind by watching it internally, so what is behind the mind can shine through. Most will do anything to avoid the process. Find a religion, go to a psychologist, a healer, get married, even run away to India and fall into a guru's lap. However, if we follow where this process is leading us and go within to the only place we've ever needed to go, something revolutionary happens. To walk the path and finish this quest, the commitment to it must be of the highest order, symbolized by the knights searching for the Holy Grail. Rose insists that one's philosophy has to be one's life, if that philosophy will ever blossom. One must determine to fully manifest the teaching one now professes to believe, and not only admire it from a distance or worship it as an idol. John Kent. What waits for us at the end of the second pyramid's inner self-observation? Rose called it the process observer, the totality of mind. This is the mind at its highest capacity. It is interesting that Rose chose the term process observer. He called it that for it observes all the processes, everything we do, see, think, and experience. The word process also relates that the process observer is an observer that is reached through the process of observing. Once we know we can observe a thought or feeling from somehow beyond it, we begin to see that anything the body or mind does cannot be as real as what views them. No longer is the body the division between me and out there. They are all outside of this new observing witness. It is very hard to explain this shift in words, and the experience of it will be totally different than how it is imagined. You see everything you always believed to be you, thoughts, opinions, memories, from a place far beyond any of it. Yet the place you are observing from, you recognize as the more real you than any of these other aspects. That is the best way I can describe it. Almost like there is two of you, but the more real you is formless, timeless, and still. The person who has reached the process observer becomes a very real creature. This is where a person is no longer living solely a somatic life. He is watching his own mind. He has risen to the point where he is concerned not so much with the body as he is with the consciousness and the workings of the mind. He becomes obsessed with this. This is the center from which he works. Richard Rose. Most of this book is about the process through the second pyramid, and shows the traps of spirituality and religion, which lock someone to the first stage, and ways to seek beyond this. As such, I feel no need to go into more detail on this subject here. Simply put, stop looking outward and turn all of your attention inward. What is needed next is a bit more explanation concerning what happens should the process observer be reached. That requires a very unique and confusing integration process, and is something almost never presented in spiritual literature. When I use the word awake, to me, this means to have reached the process observer, the place where one can view their own mind from beyond it. But this concept of being awake has come to confuse and stop many seekers. Many get fooled either by a first pyramid realization or mystical experience into thinking they reach the furthest part of the mind. However, just reaching it does not mean one is living in the awakened state. The entire awakening idea today is sold on the fairy tale, happily ever after concept, marketed as an achievement, another item on one's to-do list. Yet it is not that simple. If awakening does happen, it is not an end point at all, but the beginning of an entirely new process. In his lecture, Different Qualities of Awakening, Adyashanti helped me to understand this idea of non-complete awakening and the confusion it provides. I will attempt to combine his insights with my own struggle. To recap, it is a first pyramid realization when there's been a seeing of the dream world in a new way to give us more ease of operation. We are essentially the same person, but we feel different. In the second pyramid awakening, we no longer feel different. Now our perception is different, seeing from a much deeper witness, which causes a radical shift in our essential identity. We are no longer who or what we thought we were. Reaching the end of the second stage results in this shift of identity, because the me thing is no longer classified as me. I am none of the things I defined myself by previously. This is radical and explosive as an understanding. Awakening does not bring God or love into our life, but reveals that the box of my life is not really my life. It has been a lie. Awakening is not going to look exactly the same as everyone else's, for like Adyashanti describes, there appears to be 3 different qualities about it. Again, this is a metaphorical way of describing a change that occurs with the process observer, and it has a different edge depending on the specific pathway used to reach it. Mental awakening results from seeing that the mind is false and that no belief is true. Emotional awakening results from the experience of unity, thus separation is not true. while philosophical awakening results from seeing no self. Thus, me is not true. That all three qualities are found together is a myth, no matter how much the books try to present it otherwise. That becomes one of awakening's great traps. It looks like a complete package has happened, when in fact only a part has happened. It is an odd thing, on one hand, to gain a great clarity, especially mental clarity, of self and reality, but meanwhile, missing the need to integrate it. On an awakening, the manual we were given about how to live life, from parents, religion, culture, society, is blown out of the system. That manual is what you wake up from. You find from awakening that it was not a manual of how to live, it was actually a manual of how not to live. It was a manual of how to be sane, written by the insane. But as that disappears out of your system, you don't quite know how to live anymore, because everything has changed. You are not given the awakened manual. You have to treat the new paradigm like learning to ride a bike. Keep getting back on each time you fall off. But once you find your balance, then it's on its way. It runs on its own. But you first have to find a whole new balance. Adyashanti. What Adyashanti calls a mind awakening, reaching the quality of the process observer that is primary mental, he describes as an awakening of space. Previously, all mental activity was somehow individual and personal, limited to our own head. But with awakening, we are no longer only a mind, a body, thoughts, and personality. Instead, we see we are infinite. One gets a great amount of clarity as we see through the limited knowledge of mental thought, and all the ways we have been creating ourselves through beliefs and concepts. Something in us has done as Rose suggested, seen the mind from beyond the mind. It sounds like a simple thing, but if it happens, it changes everything about who we thought we were. I am not my thoughts or what has happened, but the nothingness of a greater mind. At first, this is very wonderful and freeing, as we know that no matter what we believe, it is not true. This creates a space where, due to a lessening of focus on our thought, it can stop more often, and its own leaving us a gap. In this gap, a more direct knowing, gnosis, can now arrive suddenly and answer that with which we have been pondering. In some cases, this new insight will come immediately. For others, this may take time. If the awakening occurs from an emotional path, generally there's what is called the experience of unity or cosmic consciousness. This experiencing of the universe as an undivided whole, of its being alive, conscious, perfect, eternal, and beautiful. It is usually considered the ultimate spiritual experience in most metaphysical teachings. Adyashanti refers to it as total intimacy with all of existence, since you see, in fact, that you are all of existence. It is not just the feeling of being safe and protected of a first pyramid heart realization. This shows that the one doing the protecting must, in fact, be myself. It provides overwhelming love, openness, and calm. One has escaped separation, as myself is everyone else's same self. As Adyashanti suggests, the philosophical awakening is the awareness of the existential form of nothingness. A grasping at a personal self, likely since childhood, stops. We see we never were that self, and are in fact not a self at all. It is the realization that not only is the world a type of dream, first pyramid realization, but that I too am nothing but a dream. This brings an incredible detachment to one's experience. This awakening will result in a great lessening of desires and wants, such as success and achievement, which are seen through as ego-created concepts. As one can imagine, any of these awakenings will be transforming for a while. But then, like a lotus flower that opens to the light, it begins to shut back down on itself, and all we have viewed clearly becomes murky again. There is much work left to do, because all honeymoons eventually end. In the honeymoon, you are beautifully stuck in the naive sense of total completion. I am totally awake. It is done. Adyashanti. In one sense, it is true that all of awakening has come complete, but in the hologram sense, where a part contains the whole. Awakening is a part that contains the whole. We glimpse the whole while seeing with just a part. It sounds confusing, but that is the best way I can describe it. The withdrawing egoic mind tricks us into thinking that the awakening itself was total, as opposed to a clearer view of a part which contained the whole. No matter. The ego does get weakened by the awakened view, and for a while there is clarity and vitality, similar to falling in love or being on a honeymoon. A place where there is great freedom, relief, and ease due to the ego's retreat. Since the awakening seems to arrive complete, we feel this is how it will be forever. We will be living in this clarity and vitality. It can last for days, weeks, months, and in a few cases for several years. That is what happened to me after the canyon. For 4 to 6 months, there was great mental clarity and an amazing ease to life. I didn't think the clarity could ever be lost. I should have taken cave time to allow the body and mind to integrate what happened, but I walked back into the world right away. Then the honeymoon clarity began to fade, and the return to normal sensing reality was hard. Back in the everyday world, all that appeared was confusion, because while the old beliefs were blown out of the system, nothing new had come to replace them. I got ill and confused. I wondered if anything really happened at all, or if I had tricked myself. Was I still asleep? Or perhaps, had I gone back to sleep? One can never really go back to sleep, though, for there is always something in the background that sees the delusion of certain actions or thoughts, only it has trouble stepping in to stop the action. Oddly, the culprit after awakening is still ego, which is not killed from the view of the process observer. It is more correct to say that ego gets wounded and leaves in retreat, hence the ease and clarity. But ego is not run away. Like a good general, it retreats to reorganize. Ego is the greatest chameleon in existence, and will rally to morph itself into something new. Some say there are more ways and more places to get stuck in after an awakening than before. I would have laughed at such an idea until I saw personally how true this is. The way to stop the reorganization of ego is to complete the integration of the awakening by recognizing that there are 3 different qualities, mental, emotional, and philosophical, that define and make up the process observer. This small understanding, that awakening will appear as complete, but likely is not, will help us avoid thinking we are done. Instead, look carefully at where we are, what has happened, and what we might be avoiding or denying. This can bypass a lot of problems and avoid good intentions getting mixed with disastrous errors, one that can create some really odd mistakes. The thing is, I am certain it takes years to incorporate the insight. The somatic mind is what has the experience, but it takes years for it to come to terms with it and gradually alter its whole psychology in accordance with it. Mike J. from John Kent. To sink into awakening requires nakedness, vulnerability, and a total defenselessness, as there is no longer a protective shield, masks, or armor. That requires a state of freedom. Not the idea that one is now free to do or get anything they want, but instead a freedom to let everyone and the whole world be just as they are. It can take years to allow that need for control of everyone and everything to drain out of our system. Years to let that different non-personal definition of freedom arise and act in our lives. Post-awakening is a transition from oneness back to duality. During this phase, you will be disturbed. Every genuine account of awakening has the disturbance aspect to it. Many mystics talk about enlightenment in glowing terms, all bliss, love, and ecstasy. They can only talk about it in those terms because they did not take the whole trip. Awakening is the whole trip. Darkness, horror, confusion, as well as peace, joy, and comfort. Eddie Traversa. Life after awakening will show where we are still caught in our conditioning. We will experience failure after failure and put ourselves into places where our self-image is tested. These challenges must happen, as what we are hiding from cannot be seen alone in a room meditating all day. We need to interact with the world to test the cleanliness of our inner condition. It is telling that young priests in training in Egypt did not spend all of their time in the sanctuary of the temple. They spent 6 months of the year in the normal world. This was done partially to bring a more spiritual knowledge into the community's daily affairs, and partially to test the student. Being still in a quiet room is easy. Doing it in Times Square during rush hour is a real test. Such tests are a key part of the work. Spirituality is more challenging than people would like to know. It is why they go to teachers who reassure them as to how wonderful everything is. If a real awakening occurs, one can run from it forever. But the more we try to push it away, push away the integration of it, the more challenging the adjustment is for the form and the small mind. You could say that learning how the mind really works, to circumnavigate it, is part of what Rose refers to as using the mind's tricks against itself. I don't want to go into more detail on this here, but you can find in the appendix information on the process of integration of awakening. It would be quite helpful if you were at or close to this stage. After realization, everyone will make mistakes. Big blunders, you know. But it is like something does not really want to believe it. You start to do very dumb things. It is not ill will or want for harm. Actually, the intention in all the dumb choices was usually very good and honorable. But being drunk on emptiness, and with egoic structures still in place, the actions that come out can be very distorted. And the only way out of it was to let go of all of this, ways I wanted to perceive myself, the person I wanted to be, and just get honest. Adyashanti. Fully integrating the process observer can take many years. One's entire body and mind has to get stabilized to this new way of seeing self and reality. Anything no longer aligned with the spirit's intentions is likely to feel unpleasant and uncomfortable. Some will have to make many changes, others few, depending on how aligned their life was prior. The main reason someone will go back to the egoic mind after awakening is that, due to confusion, they attempt to maintain structures that no longer work. Usually someone only does this for so long before life gets too painful, and they must set these structures down. As fear diminishes, what comes instead is gratitude. Gratitude for the fact that something wrong has vanished. We become very thankful for what we know. Even though challenges and problems don't go away, we are grateful. We are grateful now for how we perceive them. For everything that comes to us that we like, our hearts begin to swell for the surprising way the universe has found to bring those elements into our existence. For anything we don't like, it is now seen as a challenge, a way to find one more block in our subconscious. Things are less a blessing or a curse, and more like openings from the spirit. Some are fun, some are not, but we've changed our perception on life's experiences. An entire document in ancient Egypt, the pyramid texts, was created to help with this stage. That is because if an awakening has really occurred, it will begin to open all of the areas within that we've been hiding from. Old pain and trauma will surface, as will odd facets of our personality or strange desires we pushed away. Even though it can create a tremendous amount of problems, it is a good thing. For something is forcing us to look fully within in order to finally acknowledge our totality. To draw out all the hidden parts of ourselves will demand a total honesty. The good news is that while someone can run from this process their whole life, if awakening has occurred, an inner honesty will eventually take them over, and they will have to look at all they have attempted to avoid. It may take 20 years, but it will still occur. Recall that what I'm calling awakening is reaching the process observer in the second pyramid. This is also the greater mind. Thus there's an aspect of the mental as part of any awakening, but that can cause problems if there's been little work done on any old emotional issues along the way. After an awakening, issues can become more messy for you and those around you due to this emotional baggage not being cleaned. We can do some crazy things if the ego is still around and unchecked, for it will flow to one's deepest delusions. Generally, the intention for any action has an honorable foundation with the intent to help out or make a difference. If the remaining unseen egoic structures that twist it and gets us to act in misguided ways, this will continue until these hidden inner emotional pains are walked into and transformed. Some may need professional counseling, more first pyramid work, if they've had traumatic experiences in their past not yet cleaned up. Knowing that such distortions can happen will help us be more aware, to see the traps earlier, and to move through them more smoothly. Doing so will hopefully cause far less damage to ourselves and others during the balancing period as possible. Rose was asked once, "Does the path get any easier after an awakening?" And Rose responded, "No, but it gets funnier." One of the strangest challenges that can come with an awakening is a loss of personal will. That means the basic source of what drives us and motivates us, getting things for me, starts to go away. As such, there is almost no motivation to do anything, even to eat. It comes as a shock. More and more you lose your reference of what you want to do for the next 5 minutes, 5 weeks, or 5 years. It can be strange. There are times I have the urge to sit still. Not to meditate, read, or contemplate, literally just sit there. It's hard to describe. The egoic mind is not demanding any action be started as a way to accomplish something, hence the call is just to sit still. Like I say, it's really odd, and can't be known until it starts to happen to you. Most will try old activities and behavior, even if they never really liked them, to try to break it. Doing something seems better than doing nothing. Just because one set of wants leaves, however, does not mean that something comes right away to fill the space. Almost like it is waiting for the entire space to be empty before it comes in. The results of this living for a long time in a limbo zone, a gap between the disappearance of one thing and the coming of the next. And for some, this limbo can last for years. One of the beliefs is that awakening will create ways to live life more deeply or enjoyably. The world will somehow become one's playground. Rose confronts us that this is quite foolish, to go rushing for an awakening with the idea that we will return to life in some sort of wonderful superhero state. We may in fact find out that we no longer have any interest in the game of life at all. That is because a major part of awakening is to see that there is no world and no real people. All are fictional shadows cast on an also fictional cave. That does not mean one goes out and tries to hurt others, and there's no reason to do so. There's no reason for any action. All one can then do is decide to stand fully within the truth as has been revealed without worry. Something that can help with the process is to look over an idea from Carlos Castaneda in his early books that he called controlled folly, mostly laid out in his book A Separate Reality, which caused a great amount of misinterpretation from his readers. People believed this description was some sort of practice to drop the ego, but Castaneda was describing the state that comes after an awakening, where one action is no longer better than anything else. Everything is equal. Controlled folly is a specific reaction to this revelation, which is to pretend like we still want things. This tends to make one like an actor on a stage. We allow for the unfoldment of whatever what is wants. I am pretty much the same person as I was before, but I don't put much value on stuff. I admit I'm a spectator in the audience, and I'm not trying to change the script. Before, I was always trying to change the script. Richard Rose. With an awakening, the body goes through a profound physical transformation. Energy is getting turned from its normal outward focus to acquire, to just being still so the body can be cleansed. This often leads to a lot of insomnia, as the nervous system is not used to that much raw energy inward. Awakening can be a shock to the body, combined with an energy surge, Kundalini force released in response. So strong was it that some likely died within a few hours of an awakening, and it might give a whole idea to the unknown phenomena called spontaneous human combustion. The body must clean out the conditioning, and for some this can be agonizing and the burning experience for weeks following an awakening. For others, such burning comes later, and can often manifest as an illness in the post-awakening experience. In my case, the illness began seemingly from nowhere, 1.5 years after, and lasted about 5 years. I saw 20 experts in all aspects of healing and medicine, each one who gave a different diagnosis and cure. None of them worked. And one day, it just stopped. I still have no idea exactly what it was, but it not only made life difficult for the body, it was very difficult for the mind. The time this illness left was a time that I had made some major life changes that I had needed to make and had been putting off, as if the illness was some sort of beacon based on the way I was living. But when we finally acknowledged that we don't have to be that old person anymore, in fact, it is just a mask, that grasping part of identity can start to fall away. Others, conversely, can find they may sleep day after day, catching up on years of no rest. This, of course, begins to tear at the mental concept that I should be doing something. I need to be working hard to get ahead. It too can be a very confusing experience. The old identity does not want to leave peacefully. One has to watch the ways the ego tries to reform itself after awakening. A standard one is to try to gain superiority from the experience. To no longer work on ourselves but go out and tell others what they should be doing, via talks, or just with everyone they meet over coffee. They now believe they now know everything, and want to make sure they tell everyone. It is something I went through facets of, and it seems like it hits in some way for everyone. It is the ego trying to redefine itself in the identity of an awakened person. But of course there cannot be an awakened person, and that is what makes the trap so bizarre. Sometimes called spiritual drunkenness, the period can be mild and harmless, or seriously destructive. Others turn this into a belief that until the planet that the planet and all humans need to be saved, and that they are the only one that can do it. This type of delusional person will crash hard when it finally gets revealed that they cannot save the planet or humanity, and maybe not even one person. It can lead to a long post-awakening depression until they sort out exactly why they needed to turn awakening into a job. Adyashanti points out that another trap is the attempt to run away from the process, either by traveling or finding a relationship, and avoid focusing on all that is not complete right here and now. Since either of these actions are based on the need to run away from oneself and one's remaining shadow parts, the relationship or travel will generally be messy. And that is going to get pointed out to us over and over again until we get it. For some, there will be odd desires that we always wanted: bungee jumping, Mardi Gras parade. All those wants will come out and need to be acknowledged and allowed to leave on their own. Not being conscious of the process can mean that a lot of odd things can be brought into our actions trying to fulfill these unheard desires, hopes, and fears. The more we can be aware of this, the more that we can be aware that this will happen, the better chance we have to see and acknowledge them without needing them to be acted on. Some act the other way and just try to hide from life altogether, and this sort of running away is called Zen sickness or spiritual bypassing. These people will often say phrases like, "I don't really exist, so it doesn't matter what happens, ha ha ha." One is avoiding the actual experience of being a human and not bringing in what was revealed in the awakening down into form. A few who come from a place of deep pain can reorganize around a state of what can best be called a stupor, where a sense of great bliss comes over them, but not a true experience of the absolute, but an ego-induced covering of their inner emotional pain still not worked through. An emotion-focused awakening can leave one totally vulnerable at the level of feelings. An ego does not like to be vulnerable at any level. To awaken here will be wonderful for a while, for all appears to be love and happiness and joy. The problem is that there's no awakened mind to help the heart discriminate where to go and be. Thus the awakened heart person can do some really strange things, for the willingness to open is not tempered with logical thoughts to ask, is this really a good idea? Others can get lost in a semi-blissed out stupor that makes them incapable of functioning in the normal world, as they sit lost in a personal, almost drug-created state of love and bliss that they never see is all just an egoic cover to keep them from looking within at all that is being pushed into the hidden corners of the self. If the destruction of self is the main component of awakening, the loss of personal will can hit very hard. Seeing there is no self, thus no choice or free will, the egoic mind distorts itself on the concept of nothing to do. They get bored and just sit around all day in a sort of depression. Susan Segal went through 5 years of that, what she called the winter time of the experience. The ego is no longer in charge, thus sees emptiness as empty, therefore boring. The flip side of seeing one does not exist as a form, seemingly, means there's no consequences for any actions, so just doing what you want. Phil Connor's actions after driving the car on Groundhog Day has this delusion. Though he has no consequences for any of his crazy actions the next morning, none of them have brought Phil any contentment. It is not happiness he was missing, but being at ease with where he is right now. This changes when he stops trying to get what he wants even stops trying to kill himself, and decides he is stuck with it, so sees how he can use the time for something more valuable. Having no fear is only valid without egoic conditioning to mess it up. Karl Renz reminded me that the experience of unity, even pure white light, is still a mental experience that needs an experiencer. That means a separation between the experience and the experiencer. It's so subtle it's missed. But there is still someone here having the experience of unity. Any second period awakening is a mind-based quality, and it will either seem more mental, emotional, or philosophical, depending on the path one was walking, but it would still be an emotional awakening quality, for example. Thank you for listening to the second part of Chapter 4. I'll be returning soon with the final section, which is Pyramid 3, in a few days.